Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of Nintendo Pals Podcast. This is going to be kind of a different thing. We've not done something like this before. For context, during the recording of episode 107 of Nintendo Pals Podcast with our guest Sean Capri, Micah had some microphone problems, technical difficulties that kind of took him out of the cast for a chunk of time. Because of that, I had this backup segment that was going to be the end of the episode, but I was planning on cutting because it was going long. I pulled that in and did it for this. And so this is a little interview with Sean Capri on how he got started as a podcaster. And he does this exact same kind of interview and podcast format all the time on his show, We the Gamercast, where he hangs out with a random person from the internet. That is how I first got to have a conversation with Sean Capri. And so I was the one telling my story and how I got into podcasting and how Nintendo Pals has gotten to where it's at. But I've never heard his story. I don't actually know it. And so I decided to just ask the questions. And this is a fascinating look at the history of his podcasting, because he's been podcasting essentially since hobbyists could do it. And so right when that became available for hobbyists to do in an easy way, he was like at the forefront of that. And so it's very cool because throughout the course of this discussion, we go through his history from where he started there at the very beginning to where he is now with a pretty successful podcasting platform. Now, he's kind of a large name in the indie gaming space. But, I mean, it's not like IGN, not like Kinda Funny, but the like next tier down, and then you go down like 4 more tiers, and that's where the Nintendo Pals are at. So it's very kind of him to come on to here and to share his story, and it is very fascinating. Even if you haven't listened to his stuff before, hearing his origin story as well as like the journey that he took as a creator is inspiring, and I encourage everybody to take notes, because maybe you'll find some little gems, good knowledge in here that could help you in your creative endeavors. I certainly was inspired. Let's just jump right into it. Sean, I have not ever heard your podcaster origin story. So I want to know what got you, and this is something you do all the time. So for those who are not familiar, Sean runs a show among many of his other escapades called We the Gamercast, where he sits down with a stranger on the internet. That is how I first associated with Sean. He was on the Nintendo Dads, and I was like, oh, this is super cool. I checked out his stuff, found that show specifically somehow, which is weird that that's one of the ones I found first, because that's like the hardcore fan show, I think. I don't know how it all works over there.
The Gamercast, you think is? Yeah. I would say it's probably the hardest to find. Like it's like Fight Club.
We don't talk about it.
You don't talk about it. We don't advertise it. It's not like you don't go, I'm going to listen to a video game podcast and find that somehow. Like you basically have to hear about it, probably from me guesting on another show or somebody else telling you about it. So.
And that's exactly what happened for me. And I was like, ooh, I want to be on the show. So I came onto the show. Well, you let me come onto the show. I didn't just show up.
I was just sitting here. All of a sudden, you just
yeah, that's what he does for that show. You just sit in a room. It's open,
just waiting.
But you talk to people about their origins and how they get into content creation or whatever they're doing that you're talking about.
Yeah, man.
I have never heard this from your perspective. So you started podcasting before kids were in the picture. So it's been
and
many years.
Lincoln's 5. So yeah. Well, and I don't want to regale you with like it is a bit of a long story, so I'll try to keep it somewhat short, I guess. So I think like if I'm going really back to the beginning, my interest in podcasts really started when Apple decided to take podcasts out of the music app and put it as its own app. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but before podcasts were like super, super popular, it was like a subcategory within your music app. And one day they had an update to the iOS, and all of a sudden podcasts appeared as its own separate app. And I asked my friend about I've heard about these podcast things. And before that, you'd have to plug your iPod into your computer and sync it all up. And it wasn't very user friendly at all. Like podcasters, like the guys at Player One Podcast, they were in it before like it was easy. Like it was really, really hard to do. So I started getting interested in it at about that time, but I was listening to more like comedy podcasts, like stand-up comics would have their own podcasts and things like that. And it wasn't until I discovered, I don't even know how I ended up doing it, but I discovered Podcast Beyond, which really just changed everything for me. The PlayStation podcast from IGN, Greg Miller, Colin Moriarty, they got me into it. And I was like, I love this. I couldn't wait for another podcast to come out so I could, so I could just have laughs. Like I discovered this whole, like the community aspect of it really was Podcast Beyond, but I wasn't like huge into PlayStation. I had a PS3. I probably bought a Vita because of that podcast, but it just kind of expanded out from there. I found Nintendo shows, the Nintendo voice chat, podcasts unlocked, and it kind of just all went out from there. And it was through that kind of obsession, and it really was. I was listening to podcasts as I went to sleep every night. Then I'm like, I got to figure out a way to do this. And a lot of the podcasts were answering questions from listeners, like, how do I do this? How do I get into the games industry? And the common answer now, it was the same back then, as people would just say, like, just do it. And so I was driving down, I had a long drive for work. I had about a 3-hour drive, and I was listening to podcasts down there. And I was listening to a particularly inspiring episode of a podcast called Vic's Basement, which was run by Victor Lucas, who does a whole Canadian set of shows up here. He was on TV, Reviews on the Run, Electric Playground, things like that. And he was going on and on about, like, you should just do it. Follow your passions. If you have an idea, just figure it out and do it. And as I finished listening to that podcast, and I still had a long drive, and I was brainstorming the rest of the drive. What am I going to do with this idea that I just want to, like, see what it would be like to get into the games industry of some sort? But still, podcasting was kind of difficult to get into. So my idea ended up being a blog, and the blog was called All in Fun and Games, which is why I love Seth's podcast, All N Podcast, because I had a similar kind of play on words there.
Yeah, same.
So my whole thing started with writing. Actually, I wasn't thinking podcasting. I thought of myself as a decent writer. I don't think that I actually was a good writer, but started a blog, I think on Tumblr maybe. And again, this is a bit of a story. Somebody from the UK found my blog and said, I kind of like this. Come write for our site. So I started writing for a site called 16bitkings.com. And from there, started writing and discovered another kind of blog called We the Nerdy. And this is where the podcast really starts to come in, because We the Nerdy, I was just writing for them. I wanted to do reviews. I was doing a series called Diaries of a Backlog Gamer, which was me going back into my backlog and writing about some of the older games. And We the Nerdy had a podcast called We the Gamercast, which was your pretty typical style show of 4 or 5 people, round table, what you playing, what's the news. And We the Gamercast lasted for another maybe 10 episodes before it kind of disbanded. We had a lot of trouble getting people to show up at the same time every single week. And it really just kind of fell apart. And I think a lot of people who create podcasts can relate to that challenge. But I still wanted to podcast. By that time, I had been on the mic a few times, and I'm like, this is so fun. And it's so nerve-wracking. And I was incredibly nervous every single time that I would say the wrong thing or not know something was very fearful for me back then. But I didn't want We the Gamercast to go away. And again, at the time, I was listening to a whole bunch of other podcasts. I was listening to a show by Mark Maron called WTF. And his show was him sitting down with, very similar to like a Joe Rogan kind of thing, just a long form conversation. And the format was he would jump on and just do a solo 10-minute intro, say what's going on in his life and wear his heart on his sleeve. Then he would go cut to a conversation and then close things off afterwards. And I thought I could do that and just maybe I'll see how that turns out. And for whatever reason, I didn't want it because I couldn't do. I was already unable to do a show with the same people every week because that fell apart already. So I thought I still want to do something, how can I do something by myself? But then also, I thought it was interesting with the Mark Maron show that every time you have a guest on, and that it was a guest-based show, that person might tell their friends that they were on a podcast. And the other thing that was inspiring to me about that idea was when I would write in a question to a podcast I was listening to at the time and still is, Married to the Games was a really good example of this. I was elated when they read my question. They get to the questions period and it's like, Sean Capri writes in and says, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, they got my question. Like, so I got a chance to hear like my voice, my words on a podcast. And that was very exciting to me. So I thought, what if I gave people the opportunity to have that, but for like an hour? And I thought that people would actually really enjoy that. I completely underestimated how many people already had their own podcast. So they were already experiencing that. So I put out a call out in, I can't remember, I think it might have been the Kind of Funny Facebook group at the time. I said, I've got this idea. Would anybody be interested in coming on? And it was flooded with responses. So I thought, okay, well, at least I don't have a guest issue. And Seamus Mullins from Australia was the first person back in December 2015, and he crushed it. I asked him like one or two questions, and he was just so well-spoken and so inspiring, and I was captivated by this guy. And that was really the origin story. I was nervous that I had to be something different on the show, and what I discovered instantly, because I lucked out incredibly with Seamus being the first guest, was that the guest is the star of the show. That was the best thing that could have ever happened to me because I was very nervous about being a solo kind of podcaster. But it's like, well, I'm secondary by far. The guest takes front seat. And I kind of just, if I can ask one or two questions that lets them truly shine, then I've done my job. So kind of all started from there.
It's a pretty sweet deal. I've just been getting to sit here listening to this sick story.
It is a long story. I guess the only other thing.
No. I'm not trying to say it's. I am curious. I do have a question though. So, like, where are you at this stage in your life outside of podcasting? So, like, how old were you at the time that you started We the Gamercast?
Still old. Still old. I think I had just gotten married actually. So I was married in 2014, in March of 2014. So I would have been married for about a year and a half when we fired up We the Gamercast anyways. And there's other like little tiny side projects before that.
My wife and I were married 2015. We weren't even
I got married a little older, I think.
Well, I got married extremely young. I think most people get married much later than I do, because you and I, we have like I think like a 10-year age gap ish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our kids are the same age,
but our kids are the same age, and we got married about the same time. It's just interesting. It's interesting. And you started podcasting around that time. I started podcasting after because I'm insane. But what like. So We the Gamer is derivative of the We the Nerdy name.
It was
that is
for
fascinating.
That site.
I had no idea.
I was writing for We the Nerdy. I was podcasting for We the Nerdy. I even did a movie podcast called Nerdflix and Chill. At a certain point, like
I remember you mentioning this. Yeah.
That podcast was posted there. You can even go to WeTheNerdy.com and read up a bunch of my old articles and see postings for this. You can go to YouTube.com/WeTheNerdy and find a bunch of video episodes and everything.
See, like baby
for
Sean.
That show. Yeah. Well, so yeah, 40 pounds lighter, Sean. That's for sure. Yeah.
It gets everybody.
I will say
it hits us all.
I as much as I was loving doing We the Gamercast, it was very challenging and nobody was listening. And I was like, why am I doing this? Like, I guess technically I can do it, but why? And I was really thinking I was going to tell Andrew from We the Nerdy, like, I'd probably done this. It's taking me forever to record this. I'd lost an episode, and that's a terrible experience for everybody. And then Bobby Pauls comes on as the geek guru, reaches out to me and says, hey, I hear this show. You're asking for guests. I'd love to be a guest sometime. And I still have this message on Twitter from the geek guru reaching out, wanting to be on We the Gamercast. And he came on and changed everything. I encourage people, if they're going to check out any of my stuff, listen to the original episode of me and Bobby Pauls on We the Gamercast. He goes by the Geek Guru. It was 5 episodes in maybe. And he just floored me, man. He told me stories about when he got his first NES and he's screaming at his mom like to go faster because they're going to sell out by the time they get there. And he just brings out his full New Jersey attitude. And we
Love
instantly
Bobby. Yeah, his
became
stuff's
friends,
great.
man. Yeah. And at the end of it, he just encouraged me to keep going with it. I would have quit if it wasn't for him.
Really? I did not know that.
I never would have gotten to if we ran Nintendo. None of this happens without Bobby, man. Like,
so the transition there, because I think that's kind of like the next evolutionary step. Sounds like for you, you've been doing We the Gamer for a bit, and then you decide to jump into more focusing on specific platforms, like if we ran Nintendo, right? Was there stuff in between that, or is that kind of the
no,
next leap?
Bobby and I, like, we really hit it off right away. And he came to me, he's like, yeah, I really I think we have something. And I'm like, I agree. And I remember talking to my wife at the time, and Bobby was like, we got to do something together. And I remember saying to my wife, like, I don't know what it is about this guy, but like, there's something here. And he's like, I don't know exactly what we're going to do, but maybe we just jump on a call and we just figure it out and we record and we see what happens. So that's what we did. And I was along for the ride. In the middle of the conversation, he's like, well, maybe we just like do something like if we ran Nintendo. I'm like, okay, that sounds good to me. Well, whatever you say about, like, Bobby was the guru, man. He knew he had a community and he seemed to know what he was doing and he was very charismatic. And it didn't matter to me. He could have said anything. He could have said, let's do a Sega podcast. Like whatever Bobby said, I was totally in for. And to be
Mhm.
honest with you, I hated the name If We Ran Nintendo. I thought it was like a full on sentence. I thought it was way too long, but whatever you say, and there were so many lessons learned from that partnership that I really, really value. One of the things was, we were, I don't know how many episodes in, and it continued to dawn on me that like Bobby was the star. Everybody knew Bobby, and he had his following, he had a big YouTube channel and all these things. And I remember thinking, I'll never allow myself to be jealous of that. It's something that can easily happen with like a pairing where one person maybe gets more of the spotlight than the other. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to be grateful for every single time I get to sit down with this guy. And wouldn't, like, for all these people who love and adore him, wouldn't they all love to be in my spot? They would crush and they would kill to podcast with Bobby every single week. And I'm like, that set aside any sort of like jockeying for number one or who's going to be more popular, or whatever. Like, that was never a thing between us because I just like went into it with gratitude right from day one. So very special times with that man.
Yeah. And so I when I asked deep dive on the whole journey. So if we ran Nintendo, what's next after if we ran Nintendo? Because that, I think that's where I think I first start in my dealings in the Nintendo podcasting space. We're in the podcasting space in general, because it's weird because I'm much newer to the podcast scene. I think we've been going for 2.5 years with Nintendo Pals. I wish I'd discovered it sooner because I love doing it. It's super fun.
Mm-hmm.
But when I hear about Sean Capri and the history of the background, that's like the first inklings I've heard. I haven't listened to any other than like little clips you've shown on more recent stuff you've done. Also heard the theme song or the like sitcom intro, which I
Dude,
think
is
is
so good.
amazing. Yeah, fantastic idea, fantastic. Like,
That wasn't even us. That was somebody else came up with it. They wrote it themselves and they sent it in. Like, this is you guys, and it's in my head forever. And then when we met in, I can't remember if it was the first time or second time. We got to hang out a few times. I was in his house, and we filmed like a video video element to the song.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we went and took scenes from like Family Matters and stuff.
Yeah.
And we just reenacted.
I was like, that's what I've seen. I don't know why I've seen that.
The song was there way before that
on Twitter.
Yeah.
So from there, if we ran Nintendo, what happened next? Because you have come to this point where, like you said, Bobby's the star of the show, and I don't know how true that is because I know you. I know that you're the type of person that's like, it's always about the other person. It's just your nature. You're just the nicest guy. So I don't know at what point you have your own like audience following gathering, because because I didn't know Bobby existed. Like when I first heard about Sean Capri, because you were on Nintendo Dads as a guest. That's where I first was introduced to Sean.
Go back and listen to me and Bobby being a guest on Nintendo Dads, man. We used to go on other shows as a pair, and that
really
people learned very quickly not to do that. It was a nightmare. Like we would come on and destroy shows, man. But it was a good time. Like we were destructive. We were a duo, man, for sure.
That is great. Yeah. So what happens next after If We Ran Nintendo? Where did you go from there? And how did you get to this point where you're in a like multimedia empire? I mean, you got a kick in Patreon. You have an amazing group around you now, and a lot of those connections I know were made through Bobby.
Big time.
So it's like, man, what a guy! Like absolutely pivotal to your podcast career for sure.
Yeah, to my whole life,
just,
dude.
And life, yeah, just amazing.
I think a big thing that happened. It was actually mid. I was almost going to say Super Nintendo. If we were on Nintendo, we started getting people asking us to start a Patreon. So you might remember, like 2015, I think, was when kind of the guys from Kind of Funny left IGN and they did their own Patreon thing, and basically showed the world like that's a thing that you can do. Like that was a monumental shift, and people can say what they want about Kind of Funny these days or whatever, but like
so this is news to me. So I'm like completely like treat me like a total podcast noob here, because I only dabbled in podcasts in the early era, like you were talking about when they first showed up on. I mean,
oh wow, yeah, I'm like
my dad was in on that scene, and we were listening to podcasts, but I had no idea gaming podcasts existed. None.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if I had known sooner, like I would have been deep into this for eons ago. But it just didn't know. I thought it was like Day Talk Radio, type
public
stuff.
radio,
and that was it. That was it. But there's this scene, and they pioneered that, and then pioneered the indie scene essentially.
Pretty much.
That's fascinating.
I had never heard of Patreon before, and then like it was such a big deal for these guys. They were larger than life at IGN, and for them to quit their IGN job, which up until that point, when people say like I want to get into the industry, it was to work at IGN, it was to work at GameSpot or whatever. Like that was the goal, is to work for one of these big websites. Now the goal is totally different for most people. Now it's to be a YouTuber or to be famous on TikTok or whatever else. So they really changed, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. There's a lot of copycat models on that, and that is what it is, but they totally changed the game on what people strive towards. That was, Greg Miller and those guys and Colin Moriarty and the like leaving IGN made a huge deal about it.
It's just crazy, because then, years later, that group splits off and becomes like
totally
segmented different groups, indies of indies.
It's an incredible thing, because to your point, like that was 7 years ago, and most people don't even know that's like, maybe people can challenge me on that. Maybe people were also there, but I don't know if Patreon's Patreon without that, at least not in video games. Maybe we would have eventually got there, and that's the case with a lot of historic events. But I think that's like the origin of video games existing with a Patreon component to it, for sure. So Bobby and I were maybe a year or two into If We Ran Nintendo, and we had a very dedicated, I don't even like saying fan base, but like we were learning that people were very loyal, in the comments on the YouTube videos, and we were back then we're Zencaster. Now we were using like Google Hangouts, and just like you could stream live to YouTube, and it would keep a recorded version of it. It was hilarious, and the quality is terrible. It's like we were on dial-up back then. But yeah, we were getting people asking us, when are you guys starting up a Patreon? And that was one of the things that I still really enjoy kind of tapping into these days, which is we didn't start a Patreon for any other reason than the community told us to. They were like, we want to continue to support you, and we're trying to like and comment as much as we can, but like, will you finally start a Patreon so that we can show you like really what we want to do? And we did.
That is so cool.
We started a Patreon called Make Us Better, and that it was kind of with that in mind of we set certain milestones, and like at this level we're gonna do something extra. I can't remember exactly what it is. I think at that point it was like We the Gamercast Would Go Video was one of the milestones, and we always put it into the community's hands you guys show us what you want us to do next. Like, we've got ideas, but like you let us know. And then also, especially back then, you can look at our equipment, it was horrendous. And so a lot of the upgrades that we were getting at the time, better microphones and cameras and green screens and all these things, we brought the community in to celebrate all of that stuff. So at a certain level, or we raised a bunch of money, and then I bought a green screen. I celebrated that with the fan base and with the community, that look what you did. Like, your belief in us, your support on Patreon, like, did this. And now look what we can give back to you in the content. And look how us being better we can now reach new audiences. Like, this was the heart and the mindset all along. This wasn't accidentally discovered afterwards. This was the intention of it. So Make Us Better really changed everything there.
What was the size of your Patreon at this stage?
Oh,
Like
I don't know.
how many people do you think you had?
I don't
If
know.
you I'm trying to get like an idea spitballing here. Like, is this 10 people, 20 people,
Maybe.
100
Yeah.
people?
No, we're not even at 100 now. No. But yeah, maybe 10, maybe something like that.
I mean,
Maybe we got up to 30.
You're like so close to 100, right? I think
We
you're in
hover
like the
around like
90s.
80 or 90. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're like 10 or 20.
Something like
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
Like, and again, nothing enormous, but we would pocket the money away, and Bobby and I had a bunch of different ideas on the different splits that we would do. Like, should we spend some on like marketing ourselves? But that never really panned out. So we just decided whatever. Bobby and I had a very entrepreneurial and capitalistic kind of way of doing it as well. Going back to was I going to be jealous about his success? We still had our separate things, and that was the kind of interesting thing about it all. Was Make Us Better wasn't a Bobby thing or a Sean thing. It was a collection where you would support We the Gamercast, but you would also support the Geekcast, or no, the Geekcast, yeah, and
It's like an
everything that Bobby
umbrella
was doing,
for all of the
all the
shows
stuff
both
that
of
we
you were
did.
doing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Bobby was much more successful on YouTube and on Twitch. Like, he would run a stream, and I remember thinking, like, I remember having a very brief thought of, how dare you have a side gig on this? But then I realized, like, that was a great way for us to do it. He could go push himself as much as he wanted, and a lot of what I have now comes from him just dedicating himself beyond belief. He podcasted a ton, and he was always starting up shows. He had all of these different ideas. He ran a call-in show, like an old radio show. He would just like be podcasting when people jump into a Discord and call in. You'd have conversations. It's called Red Shell Radio. All these different things. And so he really showed me just what it was like to be creative, and instilled this importance of being different back then. So yeah, Make Us Better was meant to be a not Bobby or Sean thing. It was both of us. It was a way for the community to support us, but they could also support us individually. And Bobby, with his YouTube and Twitch streaming, I think did quite well with all of that stuff too.
Yeah. Wow. And so from there, that sort of evolved into you, me, and Capri.
Yeah,
Is that just a name change, or was there a big
Oh,
knowing you and knowing
mhm.
what you did with Carpool Gaming, there was some shift that happened there as well.
Yeah, so Make Us Better, we were carting along and everything was going great, and then unfortunately, I remember the day very clearly. Lincoln was a few months old. I was changing a diaper in our room upstairs, and I got a phone call from Bobby. And I never get phone calls from Bobby. We scheduled our Skype calls for our podcast. I would get messages, but I never got a phone call. So I remember looking at Chelsea, my wife, and said, like, Bobby's calling me, like something's wrong. And so I handed Lincoln over to her, and I ran down to the basement to take the phone call. And he was telling me that he was getting divorced. And this was I was the first to know that his marriage was ending. And it was like, like there was a heartbreaking moment. But it's one of the things that I really remember, because he didn't tell anybody before he told me. I was the person that he went to tell me this news. And because of that, he had to step away from content creation. And he was going to do whatever it took. He was going to take all that energy and dedication he had to podcasting. He put that into his marriage to try to save it. And so he had stepped away from content creation. He's, I think, kind of blamed his dedication to YouTube maybe a little bit for his marriage. And wasn't that. It was, it was a complicated matter for sure.
It usually is, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But he wanted to at least show that he was willing to do whatever it took
Mhm.
to save the marriage. So it was I saw a completely different Bobby in that moment as well. Like a very, very mature, we talked about video games all the time, and all of a sudden he's going like doing whatever it took to save his marriage. It was a very, very big deal. And so everything, a lot of change there. Make Us Better stayed. Patreon.com/Make Us Better was still a thing. I had changed If We Ran Nintendo to be a guest show for a short period of time. So I was doing We the Gamer Cast, and then If We Ran Nintendo was actually me, and then two strangers from the internet came on, and we would run through our topics together. And it was a really interesting mix up for sure, but it wasn't the same. And I found it challenging to schedule essentially 3 people per week for 2 shows. My one guest for We the Gamercast and 2 people coming on If We Ran Nintendo.
It's back to a problem you had with We the Gamer originally, getting everybody
totally getting people. Yeah.
It's a hard thing. Yeah, it is very hard.
But the reason I did that was I thought it would really shake things up, which it did, to just have new voices every single week tackling If You're at Nintendo. Even at this time, it's a challenging show to do forever. You eventually kind of like run out of topics, like especially as Nintendo got better at doing stuff. We felt like we had fixed everything. Like we have to remember we started If You're at Nintendo in the Wii U days. Like things sucked. Things were that we started at a time when If We Ran Nintendo actually made sense. Like what would we say now if we ran Nintendo? Like
it's interesting because a lot of the indie podcast scene that we associate with now, I mean, we're young guys in the game, but we're also like 2.5 years into a podcast now, like over 100 episodes. It's like it's weird to be in this space of like we're established, but we're like
That's
Xbox to Nintendo, Xbox to Nintendo. You know what I'm saying? Like we're a thing. But a lot of guys started the podcast in that era. That's when the Nintendo Dad started, is in the Wii U era.
Class of 2015, we call ourselves. Like there's a few of us.
There's and was Josh around that time too with the Nintendo Powercast, or is he predate that? He's been around.
He wasn't doing that show in 2015, but he might have been doing something else at about that time.
Yeah.
But I only know him because of Bobby. And Bobby had his finger on the pulse on who's up and coming Joe after work. Yeah, I met Nintendo Dads because of Bobby. Like there's just nothing without him, man. Like I cannot. It sounds like I'm just being nice and hyperbolic and all these things, but it's like there's absolutely nothing without him, man. There really isn't.
Yeah.
But so Bobby got divorced. We had a shakeup with If We Ran Nintendo, and eventually, I was unable to do the scheduling. So I reached out to my friend Jason Lacey, who does Flux to Post, and he was my co-host. My every single week, it was me and Jason. We had a great time doing it. But after some time, Bobby's marriage was determined, like it was really over, and he was ready to make a comeback. And Bobby had this way of making a comeback with a big splash and a big video and a Nintendo Guru Direct. And that was the other thing, by the way. There at some point, Justin Masson had a chat with Bobby very early in the days. Bobby used to be the Geek Guru, as I mentioned, but it was Justin Masson who said, "You tend to focus on Nintendo. You should start a new YouTube channel and call yourself the Nintendo Guru." And that was Justin Masson's idea. So that really changed a lot of this stuff as well.
Nintendo Dads, and especially Justin, are another hub for the podcasting space. Like,
oh yeah,
so many connections I've made have been through the Nintendo Dads. They're an amazing. Like it's amazing. I hadn't hear all N said in the chat earlier. Like we wouldn't be doing what we're doing without Sean and Bobby. Like, and so you're saying I wouldn't be able to do what I was doing without Bobby. It's kind of a pay it forward kind of thing too, because we have a lot of new podcasts starting up in our communities. I'll shout out, now we've got Presto the Magnificent asks questions every week. That's Off the Wall. He started his own show.
That's the best.
It's super cool. Another podcasting group came into our community and has been super active in there. It's the Gamer Girl podcast, and that's hosted by Maddie Beth and Purple Riolu. They ask questions every week, and it's cool to see. And there's more. There's other people that are doing things and making things, and like creativity inspires creativity, and also just community. Creativity inspires community, and it's cool to see that. Definitely you guys have been an inspiration for us, both you and Bobby. But like the Nintendo dads were a big. I started podcasting because of the Nintendo dads, and then I started reaching out to the guests that were going on their show because I was a moocher. Like, I don't know how to do this stuff. I'm going to ask other people that do.
From day one, your reputation has been that you've got your eye on the prize and you're going to go after it. Like, there's no doubt. You made that very
really?
clear.
I don't know about that.
you were ambitious and you had energy and you were after it, man. Like, there's no way around it. Then people noticed. Like, it was impossible not to.
Yeah, appreciate that. It's a lot of fun, and when you like doing what you're doing, it's like, it's crazy to me that so this is over the course of, so you started We the Gamercast back in 2014.
2015. Yeah,
2015.
I was writing in 2014. But yeah.
I mean, this is 7 years ago, but it's undergone so many changes that it's like almost not even recognizable from what it was at that point. So you're in your story here. You're at you, me, and Capri. Bobby's making a comeback, and then how does that lead to where it is now? Like, what's the in between there?
Yeah, so just before Bobby comes back, Make Us Better. This is with the first iteration of what you see now with Carpool Gaming. Was actually with Make Us Better. When Bobby went away, I always thought it needed a team. I never thought that I could do it by myself. I wasn't Bobby. I never could do it just alone. I never felt like I had the star power to do that. So I thought that, more of us, the better. So while I had Jason Lacey on with me with If We Ran Nintendo, I also tapped the shoulders of a number of other people to try and get them involved in the Patreon as well. And anybody who's part of it, who's listening, is like, there's so many details to go over. Like, this is why I'm literally writing a book about this, by the way. It was one of our goals.
I forgot that was,
yeah.
So here I am spoiling the book. This is like your Reggie. This is like your Reggie interview. Disrupting the game. You're coming around. You're promoting it. What's the book going to be called?
Pretty much.
Do you have a title?
No, and I wouldn't tell you yet. I'm already spoiling the whole show. No, I don't know what it's going to be called.
This is the very much Cliff Notes version, I'm assuming.
I would say, yeah, because each one of these like story beats has like a whole thing to.
You could have like 3 chapters. Yeah,
I've been thinking about that. Yeah, like there's so much to tell, and you're right. So there's a lot of them leaving out, and I feel bad about it because like there's a lot of people who are involved. But at a certain point, it was me and Mark Carabin with the Warp Whistle, which was a great Nintendo podcast. Nintendo Nostalgia with Ryan and Jacob, and PSVG was in there as well. And I feel like I'm missing somebody else, but in any case, there was a bunch of us. But it didn't really work out. And when Bobby kind of came back, it actually, I think, collapsed, and then Bobby came back, and we decided we're going to come back as something different. And this was like, we wanted to make a big deal about it. And that's when You, Me, and Capri came out. When Bobby came back, it was You, Me, Capri, and he was dead set on the name. I didn't want to have the name. I know
you hated it. I remember you telling me this story.
Did not want to have the name.
I don't like this name because it's focused on me, and you felt like Bobby was the star.
Big time. Oh, and that's what was so great about him.
He was the you or the me. He was the me in the thing.
That doesn't rhyme. That's what made him so great. Like
you, me, and Paul's. I mean,
yeah, it's just a dumb take on the You, Me, Dupree movie with Owen Wilson. Like, it's just so silly. But yeah, like that. It's always been like, it's so cliche to say, but it's always been powered by Patreon. Like, anytime we had an idea, we threw it out there as a milestone, and people help us hit it. So, and Bobby and I were, and I continue to still be like pretty insatiable as far as like what's next. That's always been there. It's always been changing. And at a certain point, we felt a lot of heat from people for like not staying the same. And I don't regret it for a second. We always thought like, what's going to be different? What are we doing next? That starting a new show. It became a joke that Bobby's always starting a new podcast. But we were still, I think, recognizing that we were still early in it, and that we were in it for the long haul, and maybe we hadn't figured out the best idea yet. Maybe there's still another thing to do, and we let the community drive us forward with that. So when you say it's unrecognizable now, that was at the heart of it from the beginning.
I really wanted to hear that story. I really had no idea. Didn't know any of that origin stuff.
Oh, wow.
And I guess now I gotta stay tuned for the book. I mean, this isn't something that you can just like this is no dig on you, but you're not big enough to have like a Wikipedia page, where you're like, oh, Sean Capri started his podcast. Maybe this is a thing we should start. part of the MCU of podcasting.
This is what I'm talking about. And I've had so many ideas, and I'd love to even put them out there as far as like how to commemorate all of this. Like I do joke about the MCU kind of bit, but I really want to have like almost like a yearbook kind of thing, or trading cards where we're all on it. Yeah, like every podcast, the trading cards idea with like stats on the back and everything. It occurred to me, I don't know how many years ago, that this is a very momentous slice of our life that hopefully we will look back on this when we're old and gray and go, remember those days we were podcasting? It's special, man. The people that we met and the things that we did.
We'll still be podcasting at that point.
That's probably true.
Like, it'll be like geriatric. If the geriatrics ran Nintendo, we'll be like, there's no way it's going to stop. I mean, you're 7 years in. Do you feel burnout? Are you thinking like you were joking earlier, like, someday I'll sit and relax while everything is wet. I don't know. Can you actually do that, you think?
I definitely don't have any like plans or timelines. I just, maybe it's a bit more the rare pessimistic side of me is just like not everything lasts forever. And sadly that became very apparent and true. But yeah, it's just like I'm wanting to be very grateful for this time of life. I've had other times of life that are, gone and they're never coming back. And it has nothing to do with energy or burnout or anything. It's just sometimes things pull you away from it. So, just being aware that it could end, and I want to kind of commemorate it in some way. But I do want to see like other people like take the mantle, I guess, to your question. Like I could see even this last couple of weeks I was on vacation and got to hear a different Xbox drive. I thought that was awesome. And that would be very gratifying to see somebody come in and take over the Xbox drive maybe one day. I think We the Gamercast will be the one that I do forever. Like that will be the one that when I stop podcasting, it will be with We the Gamercast, I imagine. But I joke around with like All In and you guys and House of Mario and everybody. I'm like, I will purchase one of you guys one of these days. I will swallow you up one of these days. I think.
Oh, not if we get you first.
Exactly. Exactly.
Buy the game, Carpool Gaming.
I just think it'd be wonderful to join forces more and more. So even being part of this is a great.
Like Embracer Group's coming for us all. So it's
exactly. Well, that's why I'm trying to beat them. I'm trying to get there before Tencent, man. Save the Game Media's in there. I threatened their takeover earlier today as well. So I think it's great, and we're all friends, and like, why not?
It is such a great thing. Micah and I've talked about this pretty at length. It's so positive in the community overall. We've had experiences here and there that have been not as positive, but most of the time everybody just wants to be collaborative.
Yeah.
There's no competitive nature. Yeah,
not anymore. I would say it used to be 2016, 2017. It was pretty gross sometimes, and just over nothing. Like, when we're putting up YouTube videos with 20 views, like what are we fighting over? It's just silly.
Yeah. Well, it's fun stuff. It's fun to make it. That's what it's all about.
Big time.
Well, thanks for coming on for this like little like mid segment. I probably will just turn this into like a little standalone thing. I'll release it as its own thing. Maybe we'll sell it to you guys and you can upload it as a special
Patreon exclusive.
Hey, Patreon exclusive for no, we're not doing that. We'll just post it for everybody to see because this is a cool story, and I don't think enough new people coming in don't know that. Not everybody's been here from the get-go with the podcasting scene.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. It's fun to relive it, and I haven't actually talked about it in quite some time.
And so there you have it, folks. The one and only Sean Capri. And holy cow, was his story very cool. It's really great to see how like things can evolve over time, but keep the heart and keep that core, and how those connections with other people can really influence that and help to form what you become. And I just think that's something that's been very cool to me in this space. And like guys like Sean Capri, our buddies, the Nintendo dads, several others in the podcasting space have all been major inspirations to how we went about starting our show, and how, and I give credit to these guys for being not only prominent guys at what they're doing, but they want to help like the next generation and the generation after that, and just like keep helping people get better at what they're doing. All the advice and help that I've gotten from these guys over the years that I've been podcasting has been like super valuable to me, and Micah as well. We both have talked about how we just love the community that comes from being podcasters in this space. It's not competitive. I mean, to some extent. I mean, we're all like trying to do stuff and compete, but in a fun way, if that makes any sense. And I just really like that. It's like an island in this space that is online of negativity, where you can kind of get together with people that all want to help each other out and be better. And I just think that's really cool. So if you want to check out more of Sean Capri's stuff, we'll have links to that in the description of this episode, so you can find his stuff. But stay tuned for when he does get around to making that book, because I think that's going to be like Reggie Fils-Aimé disrupting the game, but for podcasters. Like, it's going to be really cool to see even more details and have even more like zoom-ins on those stories between Sean and all of the people he's interacted with, but especially with Bobby. And I'm very excited, looking forward to that. He has just an amazing energy about him. He's a really humble guy too. I mean, you could even hear it in the interview. He was constantly giving credit to everybody else for his successes, but I mean, he is just an incredible guy. So show him some love. Go check out his stuff. And thanks so much for listening to this. If you want to hear more things like this, I had a lot of fun doing this. I mean, it was pretty easy. I just kind of listen. It's really nice. Got a kind of like Larry King style interview where I get to learn new stuff about people. I mean, I've done lots of podcasts with Sean at this point, and didn't know any of this like backstory and history. And so there's so many stories out there that would be really fun to do something like this. So if you liked this and maybe you want to hear more of it, let me know. That feedback would be really helpful in convincing me to maybe try doing more of that stuff. But if you didn't like it, I guess just don't tell me. So I'll just assume if you didn't say anything. No, I'm just kidding. Nah, thanks everybody for listening. Really do appreciate all the support and love you give to us here at the Nintendo Pals, and hope you enjoyed this little bonus interview with Sean Capri. And we will talk to y'all next time. Peace out.